part 3 of the speaking test then. That's what we're going to look at in this section, section 4. And we're going to begin by talking about discourse markers and then the strategy of listing. So we talked about strategies for part 1 in terms of using the language to respond to the question, and then a strategy in part 2 in terms of segmenting. And that's what we're going to look at here as well, so that we can build our fluency and coherence. But we'll begin by talking about how to create fluency in your part 3 answers. Well, fluency is really about flow. It's about the smooth transitions between ideas. It's about the examiner being able to follow you without putting in any effort. How do we improve our ability to create this flow, this fluency? Well, one way is by using discourse markers, and that's why these are so important. They turn up in the band descriptors as well. We use discourse markers to connect, organize, and manage what we say and what attitude we want to convey as we say it. So let's have a look at which discourse markers will be most helpful for our purposes in IELTS speaking, particularly in part 3. An example then to begin with. Let's have a look at this answer to a part 3 question and consider how easy it is to follow and how natural it sounds. The question is, do you agree that there is a right age for children to stop living with their parents, and why is that? Notice the complexity of this question is much greater than it would be in part 1. Now the answer, I do agree with that. Children eventually get to an age where they need to live independently. Then they can reach their goals. Many of my achievements in life have been possible because I moved out of home once I reached adulthood. Children who don't move out once they reach adulthood are setting themselves up to be overly reliant on their parents. Anxiety and entitlement follows. They shouldn't be pushed out as this can harm their development. Now, how easy is this to follow? How natural does it sound? I'm hoping that you're actually thinking to yourself, oh, this doesn't actually sound very natural. It sounds kind of mechanical. It sounds almost robotic. And that's because we don't really have any discourse markers in here. What we need to do is include discourse markers, such as the ones that you can see on the screen. And immediately, as I deliver this answer again, you'll notice how much more natural it sounds. Well, yes, I do agree with that. The way I see it, children eventually get to an age where they need to live independently because then they can reach their goals. In fact, many of my achievements in life have been possible because I moved out of home once I reached adulthood. Children who don't move out once they reach adulthood, in contrast, are setting themselves up to be overly reliant on their parents. After that, anxiety and entitlement follows. They shouldn't be pushed out though, as this can harm their development. Notice the different locations of the cohesive devices here. They don't need to be at the beginning. They can be in the middle or at the end of a sentence, depending on the type of cohesive device that you're using. But essentially what we have here is a much more fluent response. We have that flow. The examiner can understand us and follow us with no effort, and their attention won't be piqued by the lack of discourse markers. So some do's and don'ts when it comes to discourse markers. Essentially, these pieces of language are not that tricky. They're very, very simple to use. And that is the whole point. They make language very simple to follow, very easy to follow. But there are some rules about how to use them. Now, do notice how native speakers in particular use discourse markers. Notice how often they use them. This is why it's so important to go about your daily listening practice. At least 20 minutes of listening to English conversation or English videos or English podcasts every day so you can notice the discourse markers in use. Do use discourse markers to link ideas together that may be a little bit disconnected or difficult to follow without them. As for the don'ts, don't overuse this language. You will be penalized if you use too many discourse markers. This is an exaggeration, but it gets the point across. Well, I mean, if I think about it, it's like, really, yeah, well, I suppose education should finish at 18. Okay, so way too many discourse markers, but like I said, that's an exaggerated example, but the idea still stands. Don't be too repetitive in the locations of your discourse markers. Notice on the previous slide, we mixed up the locations, beginning of the sentence, middle of the sentence, end of the sentence. You aren't restricted to just using discourse markers at the beginnings of sentences. Have a look at this example here. We need to tackle economic disparity, I feel. Notice the pronunciation there as well. We still go down at the end, I feel. We can't do it unless everybody is on board though. Again, down at the end there, but we're using the discourse marker at the end. That's discourse markers. Let's move on to the idea of the strategy of listing to organize our part 3 answers. Much of the time, answers in part 3 are scattered, they're disorganized, and they're full of errors, partly due to the exhaustion of the candidates who are in that final part of the exam and they just get a bit tired. Discourse markers then help us to present organization. They don't exactly do the organizing itself though. So we need to have a strategy to help organize our answers, and listing is one such strategy. Listing also takes advantage of particular discourse markers, and listing is as easy as 1, 2, and 3. Let's have a look at what I mean. Start with an introduction to your list. Use the language from the question to help you here, kind of like in part 1. If you have a question like, what skills and abilities do people most want to have today? We would answer initially by saying, there are a couple of skills which people most want to have today. Or there are a number of skills which are sought after by people nowadays. Or there are a number of abilities which people really want these days. Essentially, you are introducing a list using the vocabulary from the question to help you offer a solid, accurate, confident start. You just choose a word like number or variety or range and then use that vocabulary. After this, you need to introduce your first idea preceded by a listing discourse marker. For example, firstly, first of all, to begin with, first and foremost. This indicates that we are giving a list and we're giving the first item on that list. What skills and abilities do people most want to have today? Well, there are a number of skills which most people want to have today. First of all, programming skills are in very high demand in our current world. Firstly, one of the most sought after skills today is programming. To begin with, programming skills are hugely popular nowadays. You can use any of these, but notice the discourse marker at the beginning indicates the beginning of a list. Once you've done this, you come to the third part of this strategy, which is to support the initial idea with an explanation, an example, result, or alternative sentence, sort of like you're in the body paragraph of writing task 2. You're in a body paragraph of an essay. You've presented an idea, now you need to support the idea. Again, if we bring up the question, imagine we've given the first 2 sentences. There are a number of skills people want to have today. First of all, programming is very popular. Then, this is probably because so much of what we do is online these days. So reason, because. For example, almost everyone in the modern world uses the internet. Example. A little bit more information. This skill underwent a huge surge in popularity with the spread of the internet. So these are all your options. I wouldn't use all 3 sentences. I might just use 1 or 2. The reason for that is because we are now going to introduce another idea. So what we're going to do is repeat steps 2 and 3 with a second and potentially third point. Remember to change the listing discourse marker. If we initially used the expression firstly, or first of all, to begin with, what do you think is going to come next? Secondly, many people today want to learn marketing skills. Again, we support. This might be due to the marketing world being unaffected by the growth of the internet, unlike other industries. And then maybe we add a final point. Finally, Many people would like the ability to play a musical instrument, though this is likely due to leisure rather than professional reasons. Now here we've combined the support with the initial point, and you can do that as well. So basically it's introduction to a list, first idea, support first idea, second idea, support second idea, final idea, support final idea, making sure that you're using listing discourse markers throughout. How about an example then to show you how this looks? Try your own listing answer complete with discourse markers to this question. How do you think children can be encouraged to read more? So pause this video, just try this yourself first of all before you look at my answer. Think about using the strategy we talked about. Remember, number 1, introduce the list. Number 2, use a listing discourse marker and introduce your first point. Number 3, support that point and then repeat steps 2 and 3. And when you're ready, we'll have a look at my answer. Okay, let's have a look. Personally, I can think of a number of ways that children can be encouraged to read more. So we have that introduction to the list using the same language. First and foremost, we need to challenge the idea of reading being boring. That's my first idea. Let's support it. We can do this by letting them read the books they want to read rather than the ones we want them to. Second, we can reward them for reading. Kids could be given a little bit more pocket money, for instance, if they meet a monthly reading target. So second point, and we've supported it with an example. Lastly, we can take advantage of the numerous mediums we have available for reading. Don't restrict kids to paper books, but let them use, say, iPads, Kindles, and their phones too. So final point, and we've supported it as well. So throughout this answer, we've used both listing discourse markers, first and foremost, second and lastly, and we've also used more regular discourse markers as well. Personally, we can do this by for instance and say. And the idea here in part 3 is that for a strong quality answer where you don't have to think that much, you can use the listing strategy to help organize your answer and then just throw in some discourse markers when appropriate.